Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to the second 2023 seminar for the Centre for Early Modern Studies at the Australian National University. Our seminar today will be delivered by Dr. Suzanna Ivanič from the University of Kent. My name is Christina Clark. I'm lecturer for Early Modern Art Design and Material Culture at the ANU Centre for Art History and Art Theory. And I'd like to begin the seminar with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose lands the Australian National University operates, and pay our respects to the elders of the Ngambri and Ngunnawal people, past, present, and emergent. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to any First Nations people joining us today in Australia and around the world. We have audience members joining us from different time zones around the world, so I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all and to thank you for joining us at the ANU Centre for Early Modern Studies. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Centre, we're a multidisciplinary group of humanities scholars and graduate researchers who study the long early modern period. Our research and teaching areas include history, art and design, literary and bibliographical studies, theatre and performance history, languages and historical linguistics, and the digital humanities. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Suzanna Ivanič, who joins us from the UK, where it's just after 9 a.m, I believe. We will have the opportunity to have a discussion with Suzanna afterwards. So allow me to introduce Suzanna. Dr. Suzanna Ivanič is Senior Lecturer in Early Modern History at the University of Kent. She gained her BA, MPhil and PhD from the University of Cambridge, and her research focuses on lived religion and material and visual culture in Central Europe. She's published on amulets, religious objects, a pilgrimage travelogue, and domestic religion. Susanna has published 2 books, Cosmos and Materiality in Early Modern Prague with Oxford University Press in 2021, and Catholica, the Visual Culture of Catholicism with Thames and Hudson in 2022. She's currently also principal investigator on an AHRC-funded research network called The Connected World of Central Europe, 1500 to 1700, which brings together scholars and curators from around the world to examine connections across and beyond Central and Eastern Europe through objects. So today, Susanna is speaking to us on the topic Religion, Magic and Science Revisited, a material approach to the everyday. Please join me in welcoming Susanna.
Thank you very much, Christina, and also to Ros and Julie for the invitation to speak this morning. I'm very excited to be able to cross these time zones. So I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully you can see my screen now. Okay. So 2 groupings of category labels have in the last decades been deeply interrogated as they apply to the early modern period. First, religion, magic and science, and second, nature and culture. Scholars have made critical interventions from a variety of subdisciplines. In the history of science, the term natural philosophy is preferred over science for early modern investigations into nature, and the role of natural magic in the Renaissance has been given ample consideration, as has the general relationship between religion and science. In philosophy, the history of art, as well, the boundaries between nature and culture have been disrupted. Historians of religion have challenged the notion of an easy separation of religion and magic in the period too. Yet these interventions have not gone far enough. The spectres of disenchantment and, relatedly, scientific progress continue to shape early modern narratives. Museums store and label once powerful objects as mere amulets, and debates continue to circle around what magic is in this period. In the study of the everyday, in particular, it is clear that this lack of progress is problematic. Quotidian practices are even further removed from the categories that are used in learned discourses. For historians to get at them, they need to consider these categories together and establish a more nuanced understanding of an everyday, early modern worldview of the natural environment. Material approaches to the study of the everyday have revealed how inadequate these challenges to the category frameworks have so far been. Objects have disruptive value in relation to the labels that have framed our historical narratives. They show how categorical labels are problematic in individual and quotidian circumstances. A material approach, specifically by tracing raw matter from the landscape as it is crafted into possessions that are owned and saturated with meaning in different contexts, challenges these category mistakes of religion, magic, and science associated with preoccupations with the question of disenchantment that have shaped our historical narratives. And by rebalancing the analysis away from textual categories towards a focus on nature, we can reframe debates, reveal new evidence to be drawn upon in the writing of everyday early modern cultural history, and integrate fields that have fallen into disciplinary silos. To explore this approach in the context of the ongoing debate about religion, magic, and science, and to bring the centrality of human relationships with nature in the early modern period to the fore, here I want to examine one kind of natural matter as it relates to different spheres of knowledge and everyday practice in Prague around 1600. And it's here that I'm going to look at objects made of chalcedony, which includes agate, jasper, and carnelian varieties, found in different contexts in Prague in the early 17th century, and that reveal everyday engagement with natural matter, embedded in complex religious, artistic, and natural philosophical cultures that go far beyond simplistic labels. Following chalcedony from its sources of extraction in northern Bohemia to the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II's Kunstkammer in Prague, from the patronage of glyptic artists and natural philosophers to the objects produced at the court workshops, allows the reconstruction of the complex interconnections of matter and communities that shaped everyday experiences of devotion, supplication, and knowledge making. This integrative approach reveals early modern mentality and culture from a lived perspective rather than through those 19th century categories. So today I'm actually going to be talking about particularly one object from Rudolf's Kunstkammer. So in a way it sounds less everyday than may have been built, but this can be extended into the city through looking at amulets and pendants held in apothecaries and so on, which perhaps is something we can explore later. So to start with the basics, silicon dioxide, or silica, is a very common chemical constituent of natural minerals that lie in the Earth's crust. The problematic boundaries here between nature and culture are exemplified by the immediate difficulties we have surrounding the naming of this particular mineral made of silicon dioxide. The most naturally abundant form of silicon dioxide is quartz, which can appear itself in many different forms. And of these, chalcedony is a general term used for a group of quartz varieties that are made of submicroscopic crystals, largely formed and found in veins in rock below the surface. And this includes varieties such as agate, jasper, carnelian, and chrysoprase, a few of which you have here on the screen. And chalcedony as well can also be used as a subvariety, so it's both an umbrella term and a subtype. Visual features tend to determine which of these labels we use in our culture. Agate tends to be translucent and chalcedony is opaque. Jasper, carnelian, and chrysoprase are distinguished respectively by their red, orange, brown, and green coloration. And so you can see how human interpretation through what we think the rock looks like filters through into our language and how we talk about these objects that seem quite scientifically or geologically set. All varieties also contain mineral variations, including intrusions or colouring produced by fluctuating levels of minerals deposited over time. And especially you can see this in banded agate or jasper, and also you might think of onyx here, that black and white type of chalcedony. Certain distinctive patterns have given rise to specific named varieties, such as moss agate, which has dark lines that occur in organic manner against a light background. So while in nature varieties often are formed together, specimens are usually separated out or cut by stoneworkers to produce the illusion of distinct, defined types. And in museums and jewellery, we tend to see objects made from this material confidently labelled as this singular sort of type. Chalcedony and its varieties have long cultural histories, being referred to since at least Theophrastus from around 371 BCE, and Pliny the Elder's famous natural history from around AD 75 deals with a variety of agates in chapter 3754 that are deemed to be useful, for example, against spider and scorpion venom, eye problems and thirst, for stopping storms, and for stemming the course of a river, turning boiling water cold, and rendering athletes invincible. Varieties of green jasper are also listed, where its reported use for public speaking is in fact disputed. So there's constantly this kind of analysis of whether something can really act in a certain way to heal or give powers. Varieties of chalcedony are also mentioned in scripture, most famously in the description of the heavenly Jerusalem in the book of Revelation, where it says, "And the foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the third a chalcedony, the fifth the sardonyx, the 10th a chrysoprase." So all types of chalcedony, in fact, but culturally separated out here. The description of the Jewish high priest's breastplate also mentions jasper, agate, and onyx among the stones set in rows in the breastplate, relating to the 12 tribes of Israel. There's some debate as to which specific stone each of these terms may have referred to in these historical settings. But what appears to be most important in these descriptions is the characterization or visual appearance that the stone or its name represents. So again, thinking back to the color or the kind of translucence or those sorts of characters that define a type, rather than those kind of geological mineral makeups that we think of now. In the landscape, chalcedony is found across the world, often as later formations in other rocks, and it's often formed as a crust vein or cavity filling. So across Europe, the highest density of find spots is in the mountain ranges along the border of northern Bohemia in current-day Czech Republic and bordering Germany and Poland. So here we can see, this is from the wonderful site Mindat, which gives you current locations, but also some historical information too. The Ore Mountains, Krušné hory in Czech or Erzgebirge in German, along the west here, and the Giant Mountains or Krkonoše in Czech or Karkonosze in Polish along the east around here. And these were formed in the Paleozoic era, 541 to 251 million years ago, when the continents of Euramerica and Gondwana collided to create the supercontinent Pangaea. Settlers were attracted to these regions around the late 12th century when they discovered silver ore. And there's also forests there that were an excellent source of fuel. Two sites in particular became important for providing chalcedony for use in imperial and cultural settings in Prague. So firstly, we have Seboshov, which is in the Erzgebirge region, which was known and heavily mined since the 14th century, but which subsequently fell into disuse and was forgotten about even by the 16th century. And here's a picture of the site today with the sort of jasper that you can find. And also Trubet's quarry, which is just under the Kirkonische Mountains, which became important in the 16th century, and they have this incredible purple agates from there. The geological character of the region and the rise of these two sites coincided with two major political and cultural events in the region to produce objects that provide insight into an early modern worldview of nature. So if we zoom to Prague, which is kind of at the center, below, south of those two sites, in the 14th century, Charles IV ruled as King of Bohemia and Holy Roman Emperor and presided over its emergence as a cultural center in Europe. He founded the Charles University in 1348 and invited Peter Paula to build the magnificent St. Vitus Cathedral overlooking the city. Charles recognized the natural resources of Bohemia as a precious opportunity and capitalized on this by bringing specialist artisans from Paris and Venice to the city to create stunning architectural feats and vessels from the materials found in the region. And he commissioned the magnificent inlaid stone walls of the St. Wenceslas Chapel in St. Vitus Cathedral, completed around 1373, as well as the Chapel of St. Catherine and the Chapel of the Holy Cross at Karlstein Castle, a summer residence 30 kilometers southwest of Prague. And the walls were made of blood red jasper, green chrysoprase, and deep purple amethyst. And these stones, it's been found, have been mined and transported from Ziboshof, 100 kilometers to the northwest. And these walls acted as an architectural reliquary, reflecting the heavenly Jerusalem of Revelation. The chapels acted as a glorious religious devotion that was tied to the landscape and scripture and drew on knowledge of the landscape. 200 years later, when we enter the early modern period, Prague was once again the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, depicted nicely in this bunting print at the heart of the Queen Europa. In 1576, the Habsburg Emperor Rudolf II moved his court and imperial seat there, and Prague became an epicenter for the processing of semi-precious stones. Charles IV's magnificent gem-inlaid chapel walls provided a historic foundation, and Rudolf quickly added to this heritage by patronizing glypticians. In 1589, he commissioned what's thought to have been the most ambitious and innovative Pietradura tabletop yet to be made out of Bohemian stones in the Florentine Medici Grand Ducal workshops that had been established just a year before in 1588. The table no longer exists, but this is a depiction of one that may have been similar. So the table was 4 square feet and worked on by many artists, including coats of arms, friezes, and Rudolph's monogram in gold and lines of garnet. Agostino del Riccio, a Florentine Dominican monk, commented on the richly varied markings of the Bohemian stones that were used. There were agates in various colors and patterns, and jaspers and carnelians that vary in the color and patterns that Mother Nature gives them. And it was finally delivered to Prague in 1597. While Rudolf sought to acquire the most magnificent pieces of art for his collection through commissions abroad, at home he was busy crafting the greatest multimedia knowledge creation project of early modern Europe, his Kunstkammer. So here we have a depiction, in fact, in these hard stones of Prague, and here's the St. Vitus Cathedral. And then the court of Rudolf would have been around here. This is the mathematical tower, and some of the workshops are here. So every sinew of its architecture of the court and the Kunstkammer the contents that it held, its workforce as well, was designed to increase an understanding of God's world in a combined intellectual and spiritual endeavour. The architecture of the castle complex that interconnected the residence, Kunstkammer, courtyards, mathematical tower, various gardens, including the lions enclosure, workshops, observatories and laboratories, was designed to foster knowledge through close contacts and interactions. It is essentially the best interdisciplinary university of the day. And here we can see there's a plan made of the residence, and here is the Kunstkammer and the galleries, and the mathematical tower would be there. The way stones were stored and processed in the collection exemplifies how the ordering of this environment fostered the creation of knowledge about nature. It's thought that the stone cutting workshop was among a number of workshops located on the western side of the residential complex around here, and which maps onto about here. These were serviced by another workshop at the Imperial Mill, northwest of Prague, where water from the river Vltava turned enormous stone grinding wheels, which had been purchased especially in 1593. And they could process these large blocks of semi-precious stone and cut them into workable pieces to insert into this more delicate artwork. A vast network of agents and diplomatic means were used to obtain objects, art, and these raw specimens from the natural world. Rudolf sponsored prospectors and agents to source stones for the collection across the globe, and sent stone cutters and goldsmiths to prospect for gems in North Bohemia, Silesia, Baden-Württemberg, and the Palatinate. Prague workshops appear not to have used the Italian, Sicilian, or Apennine stones, but rather materials from Bohemia, southern Alsace, Swabia, Breisgau, and Graubünden. And unworked stones remain noted in later inventories, arranged and boxed by type. And archaeological excavations of the castle have found remains of unworked stones on the ground floor. The practical management, workings, and development of this collection reveal the intersections of religion, art, and natural philosophy around the manipulation of nature. In addition to the collection and processing of raw materials, the individuals whom Rudolf invited to Prague were often polymaths who worked across the collections. And in 1588, Rudolf invited two key figures. And these were both involved in the investigations of Chalcedony. So I kind of want to keep talking about these processes that are happening at the court to explain these interconnections between religion, magic, and science that then kind of filter out and are embedded and reflected in what we might be able to see also in the city below. So first of note is the famous Milanese glyptician Ottavio Miseroni. And this is a picture of his family descendants who stay in Prague later in the 17th century. It's just a wonderful image of those stone grinding wheels and how they work, and some of the objects that are made by this Miseroni family. And the second person is Anselmus Bertius de Boot, who was a Dutch natural philosopher and polymath. Evidence of their engagement with the material reveals how practice and knowledge were interlocked with belief in God's natural world. Ottavio Miseroni and his family and 30 gem cutters, renowned for their incredible work between nature and art, produced vases, bowls, relief commessi, and cameos for Rudolf, such as those you can see on the screen here, that still exist in the British Museum, Kunsthistorisches Museum Vienna, and elsewhere. Some of them had explicitly religious forms, but all of them had a connection to God's divine landscape in the depth of engagement with the natural material. The items produced from the collected raw materials from local and exotic regions in the well-equipped workshops were not just decorative items, but microcosms of the universe and representations of knowledge of God's world. One of the many objects produced by Ottavio Miserone included a small cameo of Mary Magdalene, measuring just 10.5 centimeters in height, from around 1610. Unlike a number of other cameos and statues in the collection that were hewn from a single piece of stone, this was put together in the style of the Pietradure specialists, in Commesso style, piecing together these tiny slivers of different stone. The Kunsthistorisches Museum notes that its materials are agate, jasper, carnelian, and chalcedony, all types of that umbrella term chalcedony, held together in a simple silver oval frame. The minute work produces this stunning three-dimensional effect. Mary Magdalene's skin is made of pink stone with red blood-like flecks that you can just about perhaps see here, drawing attention to the living flesh of the saint. Her intricately carved fingers cast shadows on her dress beneath and work with the light banded and coloration of that natural material here. The material of Mary Magdalene's dress with the pinking and flowing materials is sensitively rendered. An ochre-colored semi-translucent piece makes up her lower sleeves, producing this very deep glow. Finely banded stones augment the illusion of movement here in the garments, and sumptuous quantities of vermilion material here, which offset this green-blue patterned agate, which is similar to that found in Kozakov. So perhaps through a bit of analysis, we might be able to determine where some of these stones came from in the future. The solid ochre of the ointment jar that's delicately held and white cloth that seem to intricately thread through the dress unify this design. And finally, this carefully chosen candy-like stone is used for the veil, woven through the hair. Minuscule natural fractures sparkle throughout this honey-colored quartz, alternating with opaque white lines complementing her glowing red hair. And detailed contours finely carved into the dress and hair contrast with the smoothly polished areas of flesh and finish this incredible piece of mastery of natural material. So this is where you can see how these stoneworks work between nature and culture in this incredibly detailed way. So objects such as the chalcedony cameo manifest the entanglement of the divine, natural, and the artificial. They show deep reverence for the creations of God's earth, from the way in which this material is extracted and crafted to how it's used to glorify him in terms of creating a devotional object. So here it's obvious because we're talking about the devotional object, but perhaps we could still apply this to those vases and bowls that we saw earlier. The close entanglement of nature and art in these hard stone works that also required extensive material knowledge added to their value too. They're astonishing pieces of wonder which improve nature through divine craftsmanship. And this is perhaps why Rudolf so valued them. Furthermore, the valuing of this item and many others are clear examples of what Marlisa Rijks has called process appreciation. So a shift from in the early modern period from a reverence for the material and just the kind of natural object to the way in which artisans and artists manipulate it. So a concentration on valuing the artisanal making process of knowledge, craftsmanship, and experience that combines skill and materials, artifice, and nature. Explorations of nature and culture, the puzzles of mimicry, were key to this early modern phenomenon. And such objects and artisans have been the focus of traditional art historical perspectives, but they further have the potential to show how people, natural matter, objects, and ideas work in dialogue and are integral to histories of religious belief and natural philosophy. Alongside this artistic working of stones and technical advancements in their crafting, Rudolf fostered the ground-breaking investigations into scientific knowledge about stones and their properties. In 1588, in the same year that the Miserones arrived, Rudolf invited de Boot to Prague as court physician, and he was promoted to the highest position of a personal physician in 1604. Not only was Boot the foremost expert in stones in Europe, his interests and publications spanned humanism and emblems, the spiritual realm, and zoology. And his painted album, Historia Naturalis, for example, reveals this insight into the extensive range of natural collections of the court, including animals and plants. So he's this very sort of Renaissance figure who crosses all these different boundaries, but he's best known now for his publication in 1609, Gemmarum et Lapidum Historia, which became the most important book on gems in the period, containing around 600 minerals with their properties. And he would likely have worked within the Kunstkammer to create this knowledge. Probably having a hand in the ordering of the collection, and perhaps also seeing the sorts of techniques that the Miserone workshop used in cutting the stones. So he includes some of these in this Historia as well. In one passage, he also describes a knowledge of where these objects come from. In fact, in most of the entries for different minerals, he goes through their location, has a section on where they come from, where the best varieties are, and then he has a section like this on their powers. So he reveals that he has this first-hand knowledge of their location. He says, in Bohemia, not far from Argentina, which is perhaps a place now called Strebro, loichachates, sprinkled with black specks of a purplish colour, very good and excellent, is found. Of jasper, he wrote, in Bohemia, I collected red blood, crimson, white, mixed with various colours and the most beautiful specimens, and composed by the wonderful art of nature. And this jasper is found in such large quantities that large statues can be made from it. So he describes his first-hand knowledge and very practical engagement with this material. And alongside this, he has these virtues. And for many of these, he recycles what we can find in Pliny's Natural History. But he cautiously lists these qualities, kind of questioning some of them, but they're still there and often given some legitimacy. So for chalcedony, he talks about its ability to secure victory and as an aid to cheerfulness, to drive away evil spirits, melancholy, and sadness. The seemingly amuletic, we might say magical, apotropaic, and healing qualities of the stones were an integral part of their character, as befitted a long trajectory of lapidary medicine. So while evidence that directly links both to artistic works of the Kunstkammer and the Miserone family has not yet been found, his infamous dedication at the front of this Historia to Rudolf reveals that the artistic aspect of the court and collection was undoubtedly one with which he was familiar. And this is a remarkable window onto the cosmological worldview that he gives us, and it's worth repeating here. This dedication is about Rudolf's acquisition of this semi-precious stone tabletop that we talked about earlier. and he calls it this eighth wonder of the world. He says, the emperor's passion for these precious stones did not stem from a mere desire to enhance his own dignity and majesty with their assistance. So it's not just about power and glory, as we might normally think at the early 17th century, but rather to observe in them the greatness and unspeakable might of God, who seemed to have united the beauty of the whole world and the power of all things in these tiny little bodies, and to have a certain reflection of the gleam of divinity before his eyes at all times. So in this description, the divine, the religious, is located in the stones, and they have this agency. They're microcosms of power, and their gleam of divinity actively reflects onto Rudolf as owner of these materials. So Bate is not only working in a natural philosophical realm, merely touching on the divine and how its powers work in this world, but also actively interrogating the limits of this divine power in nature. So here, in a way, we have this kind of encapsulation of how those three old categories are working together: religion, magic, and science, but in a very from a very early modern perspective and worldview. The Kunstkammer then is a storehouse of material, a laboratory of classification, a gallery of objects in all of their finished and unfinished states. And in it, you can observe the whole spectrum from nature to artificialia and the workings in between, as well as the artisans and the natural philosophers who engaged with it. Aside from traditional textual knowledge, productions such as the Historia, the material knowledge production encased in objects like Miseroni's Mary Magdalene cameo was vast, so that everything within it was a sort of production of knowledge. As Beckett-Bukowinska has written, the collection pieces were much more than mere objects of representation. They were a means, a document, a result of knowledge, of penetrating the wonder and greatness of nature. And in this respect, they tell us much about the contemporary worldview of early modern materiality. Artisans and artists advanced this knowledge and exploration through their masterpieces, which were not only produced for entertainment, splendor and glory, as we normally think of that when we wander through the Kunsthistorisches Museum galleries or the Waddesdon bequest at the British Museum, all of that Renaissance splendor and glory, but also they are material evidence of how the natural and divinely created universe was thought to have worked. Rudolf's Kunstkammer was a unique example of this galaxy of connections, practices, and ideas that shows how items that may now broadly be classed as decorative pieces of art or a religious object or natural matter for scientific investigation were in fact part of much larger intertwined trajectories of knowledge incorporating historical influence, practical understanding of natural matter, and craft skills. So whilst this kind of keeps at the elite environment, it's the way in which we can trace this through the court that forms the heart of, I think, where we can go with the thinking about the everyday as a perspective of early modern materiality that would rethink this framework of religion, magic, and science. So we might normally study the Kunstkammer as part of art history, devotional objects as part of the history of religion, or the medicinal use of gemstones as part of the history of science or medicine. Yet treating this material in these separate spheres leads to problems of analysis. Intriguing clues tend to arise on the margins of these studies that are disruptive to old frameworks. Bote's comment in that preface to Historia explaining that Rudolf's interest in precious stones was part of pious devotion rather than an attempt at self-glorification. And I argue for bringing such material back into central focus as evidence for entangled knowledge and practice in this period relating to engagement with the natural world. By following this one piece of natural substance, chalcedony, that itself resists and exemplifies the problems of divisions between nature and culture. As it emerges across various parts of the historical record, we can begin to follow the entanglements of everyday life. Tracing chalcedony and its natural and cultural uses from the mountains to Rudolph's collection allows us to see the different uses of the material and beliefs attached to different contexts. How the material acts as a hinge for different beliefs, how matter, through its sourcing, extraction from the ground, trading, historical presence in monuments and artifacts, artistic and scientific manipulation and display, was affected by and created a cultural context that was ecologically located. And perhaps then there's something to say here about the particular Central Eastern European nature of this perspective. The objects and practices using natural matter were everyday means of exploring God's world and drawing upon its divine power, not merely examples of magic or enchantment. And they sat within a context of rapidly developing ideas about the natural world and its manipulation, from extracting to crafting. This decentered view, led by natural matter, evades the category mistakes, showing that people responded to natural materials with fascination and intellectual engagement and saw them as part of this divine, powerful landscape. So I'm arguing also for a particular material approach, as well as rebalancing this framework. It's already been argued by others that magic and science are at the core about humans' relationships with the world around them. But so might we also perceive religion to be. And this is perhaps a little more provocative. This new framework is not a functionalist one, as some critics might contend. The holding of religious beliefs has, of course, deep soteriological aspects. But undeniably, within an early modern worldview steeped in this particular understanding of the universe, objects and matter imbued with divine power were vehicles for helping people exert change in the cosmos on an everyday basis. In everyday practice, there was not this linear disenchantment, nor, I would argue, cycles of disenchantment and re-enchantment, but a constantly shifting, explored, and tested relationship between human and nature, and that changes according to historical context. Religion, nature, natural philosophy, trade, and art all converge to create a specific materiality, a historically and culturally located belief about our presence in the world and our relationships with the world and matter around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanna.